welcome to this first panel, a very hot topic to start with, I would say, and to discuss it. We have the pleasure to have with us Paulo Rangel, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Portugal. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us between one government commitment and the other in this very weird emergency, I would say. And Paolo Ali, Secretary General of the Fondazione De Gasperi and President of the party Alternativa Popolare. So we only have 30 minutes, and it's a quite vast topic with several dimensions and factors to take into consideration. So I would say let's, without further ado, let's dive right in, and let's start with what is probably the most visible of this dimension, which is communication. Minister Rangel, why are young people so attracted to radical discourse, and what gaps is this kind of narrative filling for them?
Well, first, buenos días para nuestros amigos y hermanos populares. And then, of course, to say hello also to Paulo. And it's a pleasure to be here in Martin Center and to again discuss in a deep manner all the issues that really concern European citizens. Here I have to say that I don't like very much the topic is very attractive for communication, lost generation. Because when you speak about youth, nothing is lost because you can always recover, and we know that all of us know a lot of people that are also in People's Party, in European People's Party, that had a different background 20 years, 30 years ago. So you never lost anybody when you speak about these political issues. Something that is very important to say is that, of course, there is radical approach, but there's a lot of people in center-right, in moderate right, that are young people. So youth probably is, I'd say, more distant from left, and then from center-right, center, and moderate right, and of course also some radical right, they are attracted. This is a picture that I can have in different European countries. Then what I say is, as you said, communication is very important. When you look about special social networks, radical right proved to be much more efficient than the traditional parties, than the traditional movements. And this is a reason for some popularity and visibility of radical right in the young generation, not speaking only about people that have the right to vote, but even before. When you speak about teenagers with 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, they are very much engaged in social networks and also with some attractive, I'd say, communication of radical right. I think that the most efficient way to attract these young people, to bring them to our, I'd say, mainstream message, is to be, it's not only communication, is to have efficient policies to education and to first jobs and to housing. So when you look at a very good, if you have very good policies, public policies made by governments where EPP is present, I'm sure that young people will come. I'm going only to give you one example, and I conclude my first intervention to say in Portugal, with fiscal policies, we have the income tax is very, very low now, after we are in government, to young people. This gave to the ones that are working a net income much higher than they used to have before. And the truth is that a lot of people that were hesitating between radical right and sometimes radical left because of housing and so on, because also in housing tax we have changed things for young people. These really changed. You know, when you look at the polls, you see that they are very much with us. Why? Because we have to retain talent in our own countries. We have also to give them an opportunity, And so I think this is a very good, even if a single example, of what we can do in real life and not only in communication to bring the young generation to the values of EPP parties and so of center-right moderate parties.
Of course, we will get back into policies because, of course, there are objective reasons. And of course, it's not just about speaking. Let's remain on the communication side. President Ali, how can we better communicate with young people? What kind of language, but also what kind of narrative better resonates with them?
Well, first of all, thank you also from my side and on behalf of the Gasperi Foundation. And thank you to Paolo. Congratulations for your great job as minister.
Thank you.
Well, I think that I would start with a sentence from which was very often used by Alcide de Gasperi, who used to say, "Politicians think to the next elections, statesmen think to the next generations." We must think to the next generations, but I think that we must avoid the risk. Young generation cannot be treated as an Indian reserve or put in some kind of protected area. They must be involved in the political process, but I should say the social development process in a fully integrated way. This is the first thing, also in terms of communication and narrative. If we use the young generations as a small part of our world, that will not reach them in terms of communication. They will not believe, because there is another problem, that young generation, electorally speaking, are not interesting for the politicians, because the votes from the very young generation are not so important, are very fluid and so on. So our politics is normally much more concentrating on people intermediate age or older one, because votes are more important. So I think that young people understand and feel this distance from politics because we are going, we very often treat them as something which is a part of the problem and not a part of the solution of all the problems of our society. So I don't think it's really a problem of language, because most of politicians are using social networks, TikTok and blah, 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 and sometimes being not so credible, because myself, I tried to use TikTok and I said, stop it at my age, it's better to leave it to other people. So I don't think it's a problem of this type of instrument of communication, but the content of the communication, which must be focused on the fact that the young generation are crucial for the development of the entire society.
Yes, exactly. And so basically, from what you say, it's not just about what it said, but also who says it, right? Yeah. We know most populist and extremist party have what Max Weber would have called charismatic leaders, although maybe not exactly the way he envisioned. Is there something from their style that our parties could draw inspiration from to better speak with the young people?
Well, yes, I think so. Of course, charisma is a very difficult thing to define. You have it, you don't have it, you acknowledge, you recognize it, but you don't know what are the ingredients that make someone charismatic. This is clear. And so it's something that even sometimes is only revealed in very precise contexts, opportunities, where there is a crisis and someone really has the, let's say, the capacity, the vision to see what to do when everybody is a bit paralyzed. And so charisma is something that is not easy to describe. It is true that they are very successful in communication. Again, coming now to your first point. And that also has something to do with non-credibility, because what I see that some leaders do is something that you would never expect from a responsible politician. What means that this works very well if you are in opposition, saying that nothing works, and then you have a very funny thing with a small pet, with changing, stealing something from a street or from an office, and then laughing and doing these kind of things. But if you are in government, if you are a mayor, then you have to take very serious decisions, and there is a kind of, I'd say, inconsistency. It's not consistent, this profile with the need to take very serious decisions. So it's really difficult to say, but I'm sure that we have something to learn in political terms with their communication. That I think we have to be humble and to acknowledge that something has to be learned. The problem is that what is the consistency of the message at the end of the day? Because you can do something that is very funny, that will have, I would say, thousands and thousands of likes, that will have millions of followers, but then when you have to solve a problem, this doesn't help you, because this means nothing in terms of policies, in terms of solving the problems of the people. It works very well as a protest. And of course, people, they have a lot of reasons, and young people also. For sure, we know that all the movements of protests in the past were always also very, very, I'd say, moved or very leaded by young people. We saw that several times all across history. It's not nothing new. And so the capacity to protest and to show that discontent, and to show that something should move, and that we have to do some, I'd say, really disruptive change, this is a very young generation attitude. And this is okay. But then the problem is, what are we going to do in terms of constructive policies? So we have really to have here a mix, because if you are a leader that is very, very popular with all these kind of scenes and small movies and things like this, at the end of the day, you won't be credible to be the leader in difficult or challenging times. And this is something that we have really to be careful.
So, speaking of charismatic and inspirational leaders, but someone who is also consistent following with policy, my mind immediately goes to Alcide De Gasperi. It's a common passion that we have. I was at the last School of Politics that your foundation is organizing every year, and honestly, I was really surprised to see with how much enthusiasm his message was received by all these young people. How can a man born in the 19th century can still speak to today's youth, and maybe what lesson can we draw from him?
Well, I think that the answer starts from what Paolo said just before regarding the charisma. We are doing a lot to let the person of De Gasperi known around Italy and around Europe. We have made a lot of initiatives as foundation, because last year was the 70th anniversary of his death. He was a prophetic in all his views, particularly regarding common European defense, which he said if we don't, he looked at the common European defense as the main way for a political union of Europe 70 years ago, and we are discussing exactly the same thing today. But I think that there are some aspects in the identity of this great father of Italy and Europe. First of all, interpreting policy as a service. Alcide De Gasperi had the courage to die poor, so said his daughter Maria Romana when there was the inauguration of the hall in the European Parliament dedicated to De Gasperi. I remember I was there, 2007. I remember she said, "My fathers had the courage to die poor." So he never got advantages from his political role. there is a very famous story that when he was leaving to the United States in 1947, January 1947, was very cold. He did not have a coat. He was so poor that he did not have a coat, and so a friend borrowed him a coat, and so he went with the coat of a friend. So young people are very impressed from this because one of the distances from politics is that many young people think that politicians just are there to make their own interest. Alcide De Gasperi was the demonstration that it was not so. Then coherence. There is no one single word in the entire life of Alcide De Gasperi, which was not consistent with his principles. And he was member of the parliament in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, then with the fascists, and then the Republican part. Then he was. But we know the last 9 years of his life, but 65 years before, he suffered, was in prison, was in poverty, and so on. So when you let the young people know the story of his life, they are impressed because it's a completely coherent. He could have had a much easier life for himself and for his family. And then another point which is impressive is the openness to all the experiences. When the Democrazia Cristiana, his party, won the elections with an absolute majority, and he could have ruled the country alone, he opened the coalition government to other parties, to include most of course, not the communists, but liberals, republics, and so on. So there are a lot of examples which the politics of today has forgotten, and we, as EPP, should regain confidence with it and give the example, because the best way to speak to young generation is the example.
So as I said, now we go back to policies. We chose this topic because it's very important for the Martin Center. Actually, we are going to publish very soon a study where we analyze young Europeans' values and attitudes along two dimensions, hope versus despair and freedom versus control. Now, the first one is very obvious. Young people have objective reasons to be pessimistic about the future, and this despair makes them easy prey for the extremists. So since you already answered this question, I will ask President Ali, what should be, let's say, our top priorities to restore their confidence in the future?
Well, as I told before, I think we must put the young generations at the center of every one of our political choices. So when we speak about, we cannot only give them some satisfaction to some of them, of their, I don't know, some little satisfaction for the young. We speak something for the students, something. The problem is that every choice, every decision of politics must integrate the young generations in the whole process. This is the way to let them know that we are worried about their future. And I think that every one of us has had in the past more or less the same experience. When I was very young, look, in the 60s and the 70s, I was very young. We had the terrorism in Italy, Red Brigades, the Baader-Meinhof in Germany, the communist revolution, and so on. And everything seems to be desperate. We were not seeing a future for us. Then we reacted, but our fathers had the courage to involve us in the entire process. So I think this is the main consideration. Individual priorities, of course, are jobs, because this is the most important things for a future of a young guy. The possibility to have a family, and so policies for families, for children, otherwise we are going to a demographic disaster. And generally speaking, the possibility to go on with this European way of life, not thinking about other types of approach because now it's very easy to say it's much more effective and efficient what Putin does or what Xi Jinping does than what democracies do. So this is also another point, because young people don't understand why democratic processes are so slow and so sometimes vague and moving. So I think this is the way, in my opinion, to involve young generation in our decisions.
Okay. So this was, as I said, the first dimension. The second dimension that our study explored is freedom versus control. And the study showed the significant difference between young women who aspire to more freedom and emancipation, and young men who, especially in Western Europe, are tilting toward the desire for more control, meaning traditional values, traditional role models of the past, and therefore are more attracted to the extreme right. What do you think we could do to close this widening gap?
Well, let me only elaborate very quickly also on this issue of expectations. Because one of the problems that we have today that feeds radical movements is that people have an expectation that is frustrated. But sometimes these expectations are quite high. Because if you look at the societies of the past, in a certain way, the average lives better than before. And it is true, we should not be very paternalistic. Sometimes people speak about housing. When I was 25 or 27, if I wanted to buy a house, my interest rate would be 30%. In my first house, in 3 years, I paid the second house only in interests. And now people say, this is a terrible problem. At those times, nobody said this is a problem. We had to live with them. And also, so this is also a problem of expectations. Sometimes in our education, we give the idea that everything is very simple and very easy. And you want to give to your children the best life, of course, but they also have to struggle a bit, because this is part of human life, and we should not be paternalistic. Look, when we spoke about charisma, for instance, if you look at de Gaulle, he decided to go to London. He could have disappeared in London after 4 years of resistance, because it was a very weak movement. When you speak about Adenauer, he was more than 10 years in house arrest during Nazi times. And so what could be his life? Probably he would disappear. He could be shot, he could die, and nobody would know who was Adenauer. He was the mayor of Cologne defying Hitler, and then he was arrested, and that's it. So to say that, we also have to see that even these very beautiful narratives, people that really then made the difference in our political field, in our political, they suffered a lot when they were waiting for the time where they really make the difference. Even Churchill, that has an adventurous life, he came from aristocracy in England, but during the 30s he was considered as someone that was a totally crazy guy and a very strange person. To say this, then let me say, I'm quite worried with these numbers, that, by the way, they confirm something that we can see sometimes in our day-to-day life. But it is true. Why young women, they say that? Because equality is not still there. We have progressed a lot. We should not despair to say we didn't do anything. No, it is really amazing how women and young women came from total invisibility to a very active role, but equality is not there. That's why young women say we want more freedom, because they think they have still to improve. In the case of young men, this is really, in my opinion, quite problematic, this idea of control. But this has also something to do with a shift in our societies. Look, privacy, private life, and respect for private life was a huge value in the past. Today, with social networks, everybody puts the boyfriend, the girlfriend, the pet, the father, the mother, the anniversary, their own life is shared with everybody. They say, and so the difference between privacy and public sphere has changed. That's why people are, I'd say, less reluctant to accept control, because their life is controlled by everybody, because they publish their life every day. And so for them, this value that was something very important in our human rights core changed. But here I think we have really to be more pedagogical, because it is true that democracies, as Paulo said, they take more time to decide. But this young generation, they don't have any idea of what is living without freedom and under control. Because if you go to some societies where you are crossing a street, and if you don't respect the light, green or red, what is bad if you don't respect, but you have immediately in your public profile a minus to say that now you are not entitled to have 30 days of vacation, of holidays, but only 27 because you didn't respect one single norm. And we have societies where this is what is going, what is happening every day. Everything that you do is scrutinized by the public powers and has an impact in your life. You will immediately change your idea about control. They only say that because they don't know what it was to live under freedom. That is my perception. And so here we have to be very pedagogical, defending the democratic values, because EPP values, Wilfried Martens values, are the values of freedom and of free societies.
That's a very powerful message. Thank you very much. So let's conclude with a very quick question. Is this generation really lost, or can we still rescue them from the extremists? I think I already know what you're going to answer.
No, of course it is not lost. This is, again, sometimes we think that the times that we live are really the golden times. And then but this was also what was going on with Aristotle and with Plato. So 2,500 years after, we are discussing that, in our time things were perfect, but now with this wild generation, everything is lost. No, of course we can believe in the new generation. We have a responsibility to transmit some values, of course, but also to learn with them. Something that I learned with a very charismatic leader of our party, Cavaco Silva, is in his government, there were always people that were Secretary of State and ministers that were 30 years old, but also 75 years old, and he was more or less 50 at those times. So we have to have interaction between generations, and this is the main thing that we can have. Innovation with also some experience. These two values are very moderate and very EPP, I'd say, minded.
Thank you. President Ali, very shortly.
Very sure. I'm not so pessimistic. I share the opinion of Paolo. When I was 20 years old, 25, I was considered a lost generation. because what happened in the 70s was so terrible for the older generation. But with a pact between different generations, we were able to overcome this situation. I think the same today. And I agree that we must not be paternalistic, but we also must not make the opposite mistake, like it happens in many families, that the parents are not going to be mothers and fathers, but friends of their children. So everyone has his role in the society and in politics. So
totally agree.
So thank you very much to both of you for this very, very interesting discussion. And then back to Sandra.